Perfect. So we are recording now. So this session will be divided into two parts. Initially, we'll play introduction to Forge presentation, which is a recorded presentation by Dr. John McLennan. And after that presentation is done, it's approximately 20 minutes presentation. After that, Kevin will go over some of the updates and new information and some other information about the research. With this, let me share my screen and we'll start the recorded presentation part. Okay. Everybody can see my screen? Okay, perfect.
Forge, Frontier Observatory for Research in Geothermal Energy. This will be a retrospective assessment of some of the lessons that have been learned at the Department of Energy's Forge project in central Utah. And in fact, it'll be a reflection of the lessons being learned. And indeed, this is a pillar of the Forge program, is to test technologies, test software, test concepts, and qualify these for commercialization by the private sector. So Forge, as a Department of Energy project, also has numerous other state, local, federal, and international stakeholders, and we express gratitude to all of those parties. And indeed, we express gratitude to the EGS projects that went before Forge, and recalling that EGS implies that you find a reservoir that you can drill to find adequate heat, and you have to add fractures, and you have to add a working fluid because those are absent. And EGS concepts have been worked on since the 1970s. And with the implementation of Forge, one of the concepts is to apply newer technologies that have been developed by these efforts and by other efforts, for example, in the oil and gas domain, to be able to test out the commercial viability of enhanced geothermal energy system. So in its simplest form, a classical EGS scheme can be described as follows. So note the elevation view and plan view, and I'm showing a couple of wells here. The first well is drilled as an injector, and subsequent to drilling of that injector, at least in our case, we have recently hydraulically fractured the toe of the injector and monitored the microseismicity that was associated with those fracture stages. Subsequently, we will drill a production well to intersect the microseismic cloud, and ideally there will be connectivity. If not, that will be mitigated. The connectivity is essential to be able to create a heat exchange system. And then finally, as the Forge project goes along, we will continue to populate the wells with additional fracturing stages. And in a commercial situation, after all of the fracturing stages have been put into place, one would inject cold water through the production well. That water would pass through this network of hydraulic fractures, move to the production well, and be produced to the surface, wherein it could be converted to electricity. In the Forge case, stages 1 and stages 2 have been completed. The injection well is being drilled. It's at a 65-degree angle to the vertical, drilled in the minimum principal stress direction so that you can get a multiplicity of fractures along the length of the well. And indeed, we have created the small series of fractures at the toe of the well and monitored the microseismic events. Indeed, at Forge, 6 wells have been drilled to date. 5 reservoir characterization and monitoring wells have been drilled. And well 16A shown to the west at the top has been drilled, and this is the inclined well drilled just south of east towards the Mineral Mountains at an angle of 65 degrees to the vertical. In all cases, if we overlay the temperature versus depth recordings in these wells, we find that it is a conductive heat regime, as is required for the Forge project. And for EGS in general, save hybrid situations where you're drilling, you're stimulating to communicate with a hydrothermal system intentionally. And in terms of that, in terms of those temperatures, the temperatures not only are conductive, but they are moderately high. And temperature turns out to be one of the challenges in terms of applying conventional oil field technology or methodologies. Many of the oil field technologies, particularly MWD and certain logging tools, are viable below 275 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Certainly some of them go higher, some logging tools to 500, for example. Nevertheless, in many cases, logging tools, directional tools, elastomers, isolation devices, are challenged by the temperatures that are experienced in these geothermal reservoirs. And Forge offers a proving ground for improving these technologies or testing out newer technologies. In addition to the challenges that are related to temperature, there are some challenges that are related to natural fractures and the characteristics of the formation itself. If we look to the right, we see a perception of what might happen in a sedimentary scenario. It's actually a result of one of the HTFS projects where relatively simple fractures were diagnosed that seemed to ignore largely natural weaknesses that were present. One asks, if we move to the left, which is an outcrop of the Forge reservoir itself, if this is going to be the case in a situation where there are substantially more natural fractures. This is a surface outcrop. The fractures were relaxed, erosion has occurred, but there still is a substantial evidence of multiple fracture sets. And the question is, how do these come into play and affect the stimulation? And so this is really, really a rudimentary question. And it is something that has been the basis for the reservoir characterization that has gone on at Forge. As mentioned, in addition to all of this, there are challenges that are associated with drilling and completion in these wells, particularly in terms of the integrity of elastomers and sealing elements in isolation devices. So, as I mentioned, the reservoir characterization is extremely important because the stresses and the natural fractures are going to govern the characteristics of the hydraulic fractures that are created. This slide actually shows core from 4 different sections in Forge wells, ranging from a relatively clean granite to gneissic materials. As a matter of fact, moving from a granitic regime to a more metamorphosed regime at greater depth, as you can see. So the reservoir characterization has identified the rock types, and these are shown here. We're characteristically at the Forge site, and it's about 170 miles south of Salt Lake City. At the Forge site, you are dealing with alluvium overlying a granitic mass, relatively young granitic mass, ultimately transitioning as you go lower into Precambrian metamorphics, as was shown in the previous slide. So, in terms of this, we have the basic geology that's relevant, but with regard to the hydraulic fractures, we have to go back to the important people, particularly Joe Morris, has called stress roughness, and that there is character to the stress field, and this could have relevance in terms of propagation of fractures. The middle and far right pictures show that natural fractures are indeed present, and that these natural fractures often are the conduits for which fluid enters, at least near the wellbore. So there's an importance in identifying the natural fractures and identifying the in situ stress regimes. And if one makes an assumption that those DFNs are relatively impermeable and they're relatively stronger, we move to a situation where the hydraulic fracture and the inflated fractures occupy a similar domain. And the difference between these two views is strictly the mechanical properties that are assumed for the fracture network. So the message here is that it is not just the geometry, the frequency, the persistence, the orientation of the natural fractures. It is particularly the infill properties, the cementation, the mechanical properties, and the permeability that is important. We could take this one step further and assume that there was no DFN, and one is going to get a representation such as this. And so these models have been done a priori. We've carried out hydraulic fracturing, and one of the goals that's ongoing now is to repeat the models and determine which of these scenarios makes sense, what is relevant, and how do the natural fractures need to be considered in this stress and fracturing regime. So the reservoir characterization will continue as we drill additional wells. And as we drill these wells, we are learning some operational lessons as well. The inclined well that I mentioned is shown here, drilled at 65 degrees, and its spud is up here. And what did we learn from this well? Well, we learned quite a bit about drilling and improving drilling. We are grateful to the vendors that helped us with this, particularly NOV, and we are grateful to the Department of Energy's EDGE program that brought Fred Dupriest and Sam Neunert to the table to help us move from where we were using roller cone bits in our first drill to moving to PDC bits in the inclined wells, and with time and applying physics-based principles to drilling and PDC bits in particular, the times have been dramatically reduced, and the on bottom times dramatically increased. And so this is a game changer in itself in terms of the ability to drill these wells, even in hard, abrasive, high modulus, high strength granitic reservoirs. There are some other interesting things that came about. And one of these things was the rugosity of the hole as we drilled them. And you can see in these UBI reconstructions for an 8 3/4 inch diameter hole and a 10-foot long section that there are a lot of ledges, there are a lot of spirals, there's a lot of rugosity in these holes. And one can imagine that there could be complications in terms of running casing, in terms of pinch points, with cementing and with fracturing later on. And this is one of the things that we'll try and continue to learn on and reduce this. This may not be as prevalent in some shales because back reaming, even by coming out of the hole, is going to remove some of this. And here, once these things are in place, they're very, very hard to remove from this high strength abrasive granitic material. So we have wells drilled. We have an inclined well drilled. The next step was to go ahead and pump 3 fracturing stages at the toe of this well and monitor those stages with geophones in various wells to determine the seismic cloud so that subsequently we can try and drill into that cloud and establish connectivity. The treatment that was pumped is not so different from the treatment that was pumped at Fenton Hill in December 1983. They pumped slick water. Slick water was pumped there. This was pumped at 50. Fenton Hill pumped up to 50 barrels a minute. this was pumped at up to 50 barrels a minute. Fenton Hill pumped 6 million gallons. This pumped a fair bit less than that. And there was no, in this case, there was no particulates used for diversion. But the principles of the treatments were not substantially different. So in fact, in this particular well, 3 stages were pumped. The first stage was into a 200-foot open hole section at the toe of the well, below the 7-inch shoe. This was slick water with a discrete organic geothermal tracer. After that, we flowed back and pumped a second stage. And that treatment stage, once again, was slick water, but since it was in casing, it was perforated. And then that treatment was flowed back, and a third treatment zone was isolated, perforated, and a cross-linked CMHPG fluid was pumped. The viscosity of that fluid would be dramatically deteriorated by virtue of the temperatures that it experienced, but there was some limited viscosity, and certainly viscosity higher than a slick water treatment. One of the keys to success in this particular case was collaboration with various vendors. Liberty Oilfield Services was the pumping service company. Extreme Perforating provided the perforating services, and Interwell provided bridge plugs that tolerated the temperatures and pressure. A real key to the success of this particular treatment. In the interest of time, I'm only going to show you the third stage. In all cases, we're seeing either constant or reducing treating pressure shown in the red curve here. And this is characteristic of some sort of pseudo-radial fracture growth. And that was supported by, in this particular case shown for stage 3, supported by the microseismicity, which was in a very tight radial ellipsoid. Many thanks to Geoenergy Suisse for managing the geophones and the monitoring that was undertaken. So at this point, particularly successful treatment. The proof will be subsequently in the pudding, where we drill the injection well to try to intersect those fractures. And with the drilling of that injection well, we're trying to evaluate 4 particular concepts. The first is connectivity. Without connectivity, this will not be a success. Connectivity has to be achieved so that you can flow from one well to another. Secondly, even after you have connectivity, you may have to establish conductivity so that you have reduced parasitic loads in terms of moving fluid through these hydraulic fractures. In addition to that, in a commercial situation with multiple fractures along the length of the ladle, you'll have to have conformance. So the conformance is analogous to water flooding in an oil field setting, that you need to have an equal disposition of fluids through each one of the fracture stages that you're pumping, so that you can have some sort of longevity of heat production through time. And then, of course, the final test that we'll engage in after we've established conductivity, and conformance will be circulation. And circulation, once again, to look at the characteristics of thermal depletion with time and do an evaluation of commercial viability, at least from a circulation point of view and heat transport point of view. So that is basically Forge. Forge, as I mentioned, is the product of almost 50 years of work by colleagues that have laid a significant scientific foundation for this particular project. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I see there are some questions, but I think we can welcome Kevin to finish the presentation, and then we can take the questions offline. after that. Thank you, Kevin.
Great. Thanks, Pushpesh. So hello, everybody. It's great to be here to talk to you about this exciting project, Forge. So as Pushpesh mentioned, I'm with GTO. I'm the GTO Forge lead, and I'm also currently the acting EGS program manager. And we're just going to walk you through a few slides that provide an update on recent Forge operations, a look ahead to future Forge operations, as well as some background on other aspects of Forge. Let me share my screen really quickly. Okay, so here's a little bit more background on Forge. So Forge is short for the Frontier Observatory for Research in Geothermal Energy. And this is GTO's largest funding initiative. It's been enabled by over $200 million in federal investment and decades of public and private research. The Forge initiative is, as was mentioned by Dr. McLennan, located near Milford, Utah, and was initiated first back in 2015. And it's a site, it's a dedicated site where scientists and engineers can work to develop the technology and the breakthroughs that are going to be necessary to make enhanced geothermal systems possible. To date, Forge has had several notable successes, and many of those were mentioned by Dr. McLennan. This is one of the best characterized geothermal sites in the world. And we've had a lot of success in drilling, as is mentioned by John. We've drilled 6 wells, including that first of its kind highly deviated well in hard granitic rock. And also, as noted by John, some of the fastest drilling of hard granitic rock to date. And also the successful reservoir stimulation that was so when John created this presentation, those were initial data, and we're going to go through and show you some more detailed microseismic data from that 3-stage stimulation. So here is an image that shows the 3 stages of the 16A stimulation. So you can see 3 color bars in the upper right-hand corner. There's stage 1, which is actually the color bar in the middle. And what you can see is at the bottom, that's the beginning of time for that particular stimulation stage. And at the top, you have the end of that particular stimulation stage. So this is stage 1 right here. This is stage 2 right here, and then this is stage 3 on the left. So as was mentioned by John, the first stage was pumped in open hole using a slick butter treatment, and that you can see that interval in the well 16A, which is the blue well here on your screen. Then there is a second stimulation, as John mentioned. It's a cased hole through perforation, but also with slick water. And you see the microseismic event cloud that resulted from that stage of stimulation. And then finally, in stage 3, also cased hole, but with a different fluid. So this was a viscosified fluid, cross-linked polymer, as John mentioned. And you see the resulting stimulation, microseismic cloud from that stimulation. Now, the red well here that you see is just a notional path for the 16B well, which is going to be the producing well that we're hoping is going to be connected to the 16A through this fracture network that's been created by this reservoir stimulation. Now, I just want to point everyone to an outstanding publication that was written by John and many members from the Forge team. This is a SPE document, So please take note of the reference and any details of the simulation that you're interested in, please look to find them there. And then here are just 3 other visualizations of the microseismic events from each stage of the simulation. So you can see stage 1 in isolation and the microseismic events that came from stage 1, stage 2, and the microseismic events that came from stage 2, and then stage 3. Now, looking ahead to future forge operations, as I mentioned, we talked about this notional well here in red that is labeled 16B. So Utah Forge expects to spud the 16B in April, so a little over a month. And the 16B is being designed so that it will intersect the fractures that we think were created or based on microseismic cloud from the 16A simulation. And once we have this well drilled, we'll have all of the necessary components for an enhanced geothermal systems. We'll have an injection well, we'll have a producing well, and we'll have a fracture network that was created through reservoir stimulation that connects the two. So following the drilling of the 16B well, there will be additional reservoir stimulations that will be undertaken in order to continue to improve the subsurface flow pathways that connect these 2 wells. And then finally, the team is going to conduct flow testing between these wells to measure things like heat extraction and potential power production based on the temperatures that they're realizing of the fluid that's coming out of the ground. Now, you've heard a lot about forge operations, and that is one key aspect of the Forge project. But I also wanted to introduce folks to the R&D that is associated with Forge. So Forge, in late 2021, Forge kicked off its first portfolio of R&D projects that amount to a combined funding total of around 45 million, and those projects are 49 million, and those projects are expected to run approximately 3 years each. So the 17 projects, they cover testing and evaluation of new and innovative enhanced geothermal systems tools and technologies. And as you can see from the map on the right, we have institutions from across the US that competed. This was a competitive process. They competed for this funding and were identified as the most meritorious projects that applied for this funding. So this is a map, and then we also have the individual topic areas that came from that original solicitation. Now, Forge has also advertised a second solicitation. Now, this solicitation is largely complete with the exception of review of the full applications and awards. So it's not accepting any additional applications now because that time's passed, but we expect to award as many as 17 additional projects that will total up to $44 million in funding that will continue to advance the state of the art in EGS and continue to enable enhanced geothermal systems. Now here's just a little bit of detail. So the previous map showed the topic areas from solicitation 1. Here's some detail about the topic areas for solicitation 2. They include adaptive induced seismicity monitoring protocols, alternative stimulation schemes. So these are things other than just the standard unconventional oil and gas stimulation methods. It includes field scale experiments to measure heat sweep efficiency in the enhanced geothermal systems reservoir that's been created at Forge. There's another topic on high temperature proppants, and then there's also another topic area to develop a multi-set straddle packer tool for open hole operations in these really hot rocks that's one thing important to note, that most oil and gas tools are not designed to withstand the extreme heat that is present in most geothermal environments. So it requires additional funding and R&D to develop and design tools that can handle that extreme environment. Now, many of you attended a previous boot camp with Andy Adams about the GDR and about the Forge Wikipedia page, or wiki page, sorry. And what I just wanted to point out to you, everyone, is that there is an R&D section on the Forge wiki, and that R&D section does link to each of the 17 unique projects that were selected in solicitation and Forge solicitation number 1. Now, some of these have various levels of detail, but at the very least, there's a summary there. Some have links to data on the GDR that were produced as a result of the project. So if you have the time and you have the interest, please take a look, explore the Forge wiki and all of the outstanding R&D work that has been enabled by that project through DOE funding. Now, just another plug for GTO. So we do have a monthly newsletter that we send out called the Drill Down. Anyone can sign up for this. So please, if you're interested and you want to hear the latest developments here at GTO, please sign up and get that monthly newsletter. And then for folks that have expertise and significant knowledge and experience in the oil and gas industry or geothermal industry, and if you're interested in serving as a merit reviewer for GTO R&D projects, please reach out to us and send us your CV and your resume to put your name in the hat to potentially review projects. So, Pushpesh, that's all that I have.
Thank you, Kevin. Is there any questions? I see the chat. I think there was some issue with the audio. Let us figure out. I think we can share the presentation with you so you can watch the presentation without the audio interruptions. But is there any other questions? Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, I have some announcement that I'll wait for people to ask questions. After that, I'll make some announcements. Okay. Daisy, I see you raised a hand. You wanna go and ask your question? Yeah.
Hello, Kevin. Thanks for the presentation. Just have a few quick questions about the production well. So currently, we put the production well within the range of the macroseismic events. So can we know what's the well spacing between the production well and the injection well?
The notional, so that that we have. I don't think we've delivered the problem statement for this Datathon, and that could be one of the key aspects of the Datathon. So we can give you some information about the range of distances that the Forge team has considered. So they've considered between about 50 and 150 meters. But as we look forward to publicizing the problem statement, that could be one key aspect of it that we would want participants to think about and even maybe provide input on. Now, the input that you'll provide won't be able to be utilized by the Forge team because the well will have spud and have been drilled by the time you guys are probably finishing up your project. But other aspects of the Datathon will likely potentially have some impact with the Forge team and Forge project.
Yeah. Okay.
So
yeah,
to answer your question, somewhere between 50 and 150 meters is the notional spacing distance that's been put out there.
Okay, I see. So currently we are considering that, okay, we would like to put the production well within the macroseismic events range. But the problem is that after this, we will also stimulate the production well. So is it, so if we also stimulate the production well, do you think it might be worthwhile to put it maybe in a place that is further away from the microseismic events, considering that both wells will be stimulated?
That's something to consider, and that is something to consider. As we come out with the problem statement, that would be something to consider in any recommendations that each team puts forward with their solution to the problem statement. So definitely something to consider. The 16B is also above the 16A, so maybe things that about fracturing and propagation of fractures might influence that as well. What I will say is that the future simulations at Forge are likely to include both wells, so both 16A and 16B. So that's one aspect of the problem statement that we're kind of kicking around, and that we may pose to participants of the Datathon to help, basically to get some additional feedback on what people think might have been a more effective stimulation stage, and what they would advise going forward.
Okay, thank you. Last quick question is, so for the production well, will it be cased or it's open hole?
It will be cased, and it will have some open hole section at the very bottom of it.
Okay, I see. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah,
I would add. Elaborate.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing, that it's like an optimization problem, Daisy. So we have to ensure that there is a connectivity between the production well and injection well, but we also want to increase the size, increase the area improve the geothermal recovery. So that's something, as Kevin mentioned, it will be part of the problem statement that you guys are going to work on. So that's interesting. We'll love to get your input on like what you find out based on the data. What is the right strategy? Yep.
Okay, thank you.
I see Mohammed, you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, for the presentation. So I'm mainly interested in drilling, okay? And when you saw your slides, how when you applied physics-based drilling and improving, the geothermal drilling rate of penetration. So I would like to ask you, since you have, I will say the complete picture, from your opinion, how you see, what is the future research required in drilling beside developing high temperature downhole tools? What other areas of drilling need to be improved for enhancing the geothermal drilling in EGS, or any kind of dry rock geothermal drilling?
Right. Thanks for that. So, that's a really interesting question. I definitely appreciate your interest in drilling and how it applies to geothermal. So what we've found is, as was mentioned by Dr. McLennan, that applying some of these physics-based drilling concepts to geothermal, they've worked in oil and gas. They appear to be working just as well in geothermal. The application of those techniques is ongoing and is going to be looking to improve. My understanding is that one constraint was weight on bit. So they're going to be optimizing to make sure that they can have the options to potentially increase weight on bit for future wells. There are other, nascent drilling technologies that could be evaluated at Forge and could be evaluated in the next well. I don't want to go into any specifics about what those are, because we don't exactly know which ones will be given a chance to test. But there's a lot of R&D directions that could improve drilling that would have a huge impact on geothermal. So definitely appreciate your interest and hope that you continue to march down that path and try to understand it, and maybe even help solve some of those issues and improve geothermal drilling.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, is there any other question?
Looks like we got another hand up, Jeff Bailey.
Oh yeah, Jeff, please go ahead.
Yeah, to follow up on the drilling question, I was wondering, I thought I read somewhere that it was done with water, but what was the fluid actually? Was it a water-based mud? Or
It was
just
actually largely water, and there wasn't really mud added. And I think, you know, Fred Dupriest is really the one to talk about this. I'm not the one to talk about this, Fred and Sam. But my understanding is that if you have mud, you know, you've got all these particles at the bottom of the hole, and if you have mud, you almost create like a filter cake at the bottom of the hole that has a lot of strength, and that strength can really limit ROP. So I'm probably not describing this as well as they would, but if you have water, the water can penetrate through those cuttings that are at the bottom of the hole, and they're easily lifted out of the way, which you know, all of your energy is directed toward drilling new formation at that point.
yeah, just a consideration. We had a well where we just had water in it, and we started turning the pipe, and there was a whole lot of friction. And we were circulating, the process of circulating a fluid down. I think it was probably a synthetic mud, synthetic oil-based mud. And as soon as the SPM came out of the nozzles, you know, the friction went way down. And I would think that even with a water-based fluid, you could get some enhanced lubricity and a lower friction if you had, you know, even just a little bit of, I don't know, some kind of gel in there or something just to reduce the friction, because just water's very high friction. I would think that would make your heat problem worse. Just a thought. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jeff. I appreciate it, and I'll definitely mention it to the technical experts at Forge. So thank you.
And if you're interested on the drilling, if you're unfamiliar with the drilling activities, I just oh, that's a private message. I just put the link to the GDR for the summary of the drilling for the 16A lateral well. That goes over pretty much the entire drilling program with lessons learned. I didn't see anything about heat from friction and other notes, just quickly glancing through, but it may be something to take a look at if you want more information on that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Andy. There's a wealth of information out there about Forge on the GDR, number of reports. There's also similar to the reference that I shared in the presentation about the simulation. There are papers out there that discuss you know, drilling at Forge and decisions, and what happened when they tried different muds. So please, you know, take a look, and be happy for everybody to take a look and investigate that as much as they can.
Okay. We still have 5 more minutes. So if there's any other question, please raise your hand. Okay. If not, that I have a few announcements. So I also wanted to request everybody to join the Slack channel if you haven't done that already, because that's a good way to get all the live updates. And I saw a question before that, where can they find the recordings of the previous bootcamp? So all this information is in the Slack channel. So it will be very beneficial if you can join that. I'm sending the link again in chat here, so you can just click here and join the channel and be updated. And it's also a very good way to start networking with the other participants, because it'll be beneficial for you to create teams and network within the people who are interested in the Datathon. So it'll be good for the final competition also. So that's one update. And second, we are planning for 2 more boot camps. Those are going to be more technical and more close to the actual problem statement that we are going to propose for the Datathon. So I'll send meeting invites pretty soon, but just keep an eye out for that email. Make sure you attend or at least watch the recording for those 2 boot camps, because those are going to be very detailed dive into the problem statement. With that, if there are no other questions, we can stop the recording and close this bootcamp.
Thanks, Pushpesh. Thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you. I'm gonna stop the recording.